Phil Harris and Josh Phegan come together in an incredible fortnightly podcast, Dream Big, Move Fast.
A progressive, contemporary conversation on what it takes to be a dynamic thinker, leader, and role model.
Backed with over 2 decades of friendship, trials and tribulations, they teach from real-world experience and what it takes to dream big, move fast.
Would you list with you? The 3 lenses of opportunity cost. 1, compared with what? 2, and then what? And 3, at the expense of what? Shane Parrish. Now, Phil, this is kind of a bit of a deep quote, but I'm trying to get you to really think about, the opportunity cost. And I was thinking about like recruitment as an example. If you recruit this particular person, then what's the opportunity cost compared with what? Or if you recruit that person, then you might not be able to go and buy that business. And then what? Well, if you recruit that person, then all of a sudden you've got to recruit a team around them and there's extra expenses, ABC. And at the expense of what? If you recruit that person, those 5 people won't come. So this is kind of like an interesting thing to have like as a model to push you through how do I actually go to make decisions in this particular area. What are your thoughts on that as a quote and a bit of a model to start to really think through the costs of any decision that you go to make?
I really like it, Josh. I can relate heavily to it at the moment in terms of for where Harris Real Estate is at. Like we get given a lot of opportunities these days with buying, whether it be rent rolls or recruitment or individuals or whatever it might be, but not every opportunity is the right opportunity. In isolation, it might look like a good opportunity, but what does it look like on either side of that? So I think it's a good one to get you thinking deeply about the opportunities that are in front of you.
This is my favorite of all time. Would you actually list with you? And, you and I, we get to go to lots and lots of different conferences. And sometimes you sit in front of people and you're like, can you imagine this person in the lounge room, like actually wanting to list my house? Would I actually sign an agency agreement with them? What are your thoughts when you see some of the different types of people at conferences?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Like the moment you meet someone, you can almost go like, yeah, that person would be very listable. Like I say to my team, are you easy to say yes to?
Mm-hmm.
Like you come in the way that you present. And there are other people you think, geez, I don't know how that person, no matter how much training, no matter how are they ever going to live. So yeah, it's a good one to take a deep dive into.
Paul Arden wrote a great book. He was an ex-advertising executive, I think maybe out of Saatchi in Sydney at some point. And he said, the most important foundational idea, you've got to package, market and develop yourself so that you are desirable. Let's start to think a little bit about that. How do you actually go to package yourself? So I think, okay, great. Alexander Phillips, day 1, says, stop wearing a tie, you're way too intense. Blue suit, white shirt. And I thought, packaging to me was all about sometimes the externals, but how do I actually turn up? So is my hair neatly cut? Am I in a position that I'm organized? Have I had good sleep the night before? Am I in a position that I feel really confident in what I'm wearing so that then naturally I can go to make sure that I'm dressed for success? And that's a big thing too, right? Like literally that when you get in that car in that morning that you feel really energetic about who you are as a person, and that ultimately the last thing you have to worry about is what you're wearing because you are super confident. There's no insecurity about how you're going to present to your potential customer.
And I've always said, I think the first starting point is be the type of person that people want to do business with, Josh. So when you think about your marketplace, you think about your clientele, you think about the community that you're dealing with. And I'm not saying that you're selling your soul and you're being you're being something that you're not, but I see agents regularly, and I had a conversation with one of our guys not that long ago. It just wasn't really blending with the community. It's almost like we've kind of got this culture now, which is I have to be myself at all cost. I've got to be myself. Well, how's going broke working for you? Like if people are not wanting to list with you because of the way that you're presenting, the way that you're talking, the way that you're communicating, you can kind of hold the line as I'm just going to be this really, really unique individual my whole life, or you can package yourself, be the person. And by the way, it's not just the way you look, Josh. This is about how you actually talk. It's the way you communicate. It goes to how do you look online, the way people are going to look at you before they actually check you out, what your property videos look like, the way you market yourself. It's be that person. And if that's your starting point of saying, hey, I'm going to be easy to say yes to, if you can't get across the line there, the rest almost is non-relevant.
This is kind of an interesting one where Nick Dowling said to me, he said, look, you're in a role model position in life. He said, make sure that you are that role model. But one of the guiding principles is just never do anything that you wouldn't want on the front page of the Australian Financial Review.
That's a good starting point.
And I just thought, in terms of packaging, okay, great. So sure, I'm not going to swear on stage. I'm not going to say something that's not right. I'm going to make sure that I'm legislative compliant. Like all of those key things are really important in terms of that package. But also too, that literally I want to make sure that when you think about the package of the person that's in front of you, reliable and trustworthy and all of those things, and maybe even comedic at times, but like starting to make sure all of those things actually come together. But then learning how to then go to market yourself. And this was one of the interesting things. And I met a guy by the name of David Brown. I think you remember him over the years. And there was one thing that he kind of said to me, which has stuck with me for life, which was provide value first and invoice second. And so in other words, how do I become a really valuable person to people? Where they go, I can ring that guy, I can have a conversation with that particular guy, and now I'm actually prepared to pay money for that because it was actually so good around what he actually helped. And that's kind of an interesting thing about when you think about how you got to market yourself, is it literally move the free line and provide so much valuable information to people that when it comes to the point of them wanting to spend money with you, there is little to no resistance to opening that wallet and tapping that card.
I love hearing you say that. That was one of the first really early lessons that I learned about when we were talking about listing today, but early lessons I learned from listing from John McGrath many, many years ago. I'm close to 20 years. He said, when you get in the lounge room, don't worry about listing. Just be the agent that provides so much information and so much value that even if they don't actually choose to go with you, they're better off with the other agent because they had the meeting with you. And that always stuck with me as a mindset. And then when you develop that, you say, look, it's less about listing, but I'm going to deliver such compelling information. I'm going to be so helpful. The inevitable happens, which is people naturally want to do business with you.
And so if you think about package, market, and then develop, and this was kind of like something that, both in you and I, we found a library and just started reading. It's probably Amazon.com. I'm not sure you go down to the Adelaide Library, but the basic foundational idea is that, like, how much has that been important about developing you as a person? Like the mindsets you've developed, the way that you do things, the conversations that you have, the models that you now use. Like, have you developed much as a person over the course of the last 20 years?
Yeah, I'm a completely different person to what I was 20 years ago. And I think that both you and I, Josh, have that mindset is when we sit down to do a podcast again in 12 months' time, Josh, I'd like to think that we're both talking to completely different people on either side of the microphone, because that's the goal, right? I think if you're still the same person as what you were last year, then you haven't progressed. So how am I continually becoming and reinventing? And that is a process, both learning, hanging around with the right sort of people, but continually, every day, how do I get a little bit better?
And it's the old Tom Peters quote, hang out with weird and thou shalt become more weird. So that's why I kind of hung out with you. But this is that whole idea, is it literally, but I'm always thinking about how do I package, market, and develop myself to make sure I'm desirable in my marketplace. And that old school saying that if you wouldn't buy from you, then don't expect someone else to come and buy from you. One of the big things that both of us actually learned to become great listers was to go all in on systems. And, we had to actually learn how to sell vendor paid marketing. And I recently got a phone call from like the largest portal in a particular European country. And they asked me, can you come and do a tour for us and teach us how to sell vendor paid marketing?
Wow.
And mate, it took me back 20 plus years ago. And I was like, wow. And he sort of said, and I showed him some of the stuff that we do. And he looked at me over the Zoom and he's like, you're from the future. And I'm like, yeah. And it's kind of a thing that like,
you would have loved that.
Yes. But when you think about it, literally that we do that on a day by day basis, like how important is it to have learned systems here to be able to go and scale and become a great lister? So what you do before you do the appointment, what you do whilst you're at the appointment, what you do after the appointment, that's like follow-up menus or, the things that we send in terms of the calendar invites and X, Y, Z. Like how important was it to get that to be really systemized?
Systems are absolutely critical, but I think it's just like both science and art is the magic of listing. It's when those two combined. So when you have somebody who has incredible process backed by with artistry threaded through it, I think that's what makes the best listers. I would say probably, Josh, you and I, early in our careers, we were probably both very guilty of being too much science, too much process driven, where, if there was a checklist to be followed, we tick that checklist, and you think about listing, we all got taught that 30-40-30 process. Josh, what do I do before a listing? So I'm going to take the telephone call and send a pre-list kit and send a Outlook calendar invite and SMS my contact card. Okay, I've done that. Now in the morning, I've got to do this. And then I get on the tour and I've got to do this. And here's my follow-up process. I think that's really important. But then when you combine people who have great abilities to build deep connections and ask great questions, and not asking questions for the sake of asking questions, but because you genuinely care. So when you've got great process backed by someone who has great communication skills and intent to help, I think that's where the magic happens. I think people who don't have process, who are all artists, and we all know it's probably that more of that baby boomer generation, Josh, those listers. I remember going to listing presentations with one of my early bosses. There was no structure, was jumping around, was great at building relationships, but didn't have process. I think that's a struggle, but when you combine process and the art, that's when we become magical at listing.
And this is that whole idea, is that you got to build really good quality people around you. And I think that I became a better lister the first day that I had my own EA. And when Abby first came on, and I feel sorry for what I probably did to Abby over the first 16 weeks of my real estate career, because I had no idea what I was doing. But when all of a sudden, when I had to teach her how we go into the listing presentation, what we've got to be prepared for, what we've got to do, the types of conversations that we've got to have, I became a better lister because I had to teach the concept to her. And that was the most powerful thing that really teaching is mastery of that particular skill set.
Yeah, and by the way, Josh, I think if you have great process, that'll probably put you ahead of ahead of probably about 80% of the competition at the starting point if you just have a great process. And then, as we said, you've got to have some skills about it. But yeah, having great people around you, I think that only reinforces your ability to upscale and do more.
And every single time you got an objection, whether or not it was about marketing or fee or why your brand or auction or XYZ, like that was an opportunity to actually learn how do I actually get overcome that particular objection. And like that was the most important thing. I was like, oh, this is a game. And then I learned that you could bring the objection up first. So I was getting smashed out of the lounge rooms early on because, oh, you're way too young. I'm like, okay, great. Let me roll out a photo of when I was 6 inside of the lounge room with my dad. And so all of a sudden you started having this whole idea that, this is just a different way of actually doing it. And objections are a natural part of a sales process.
I like hearing you say that, Josh. I don't think enough agents these days, particularly the younger ones, do exactly what you did, which is you go to a listing presentation and you lose, or whatever it might be. You identify you've got maybe a skill shortage in your business, and then actually going away and working on that one isolated area. Maybe I wasn't great at delivering the marketing, or maybe I didn't quite have the structure up front, or maybe it was like the fee component, or you said your age. Like when you and I both started, age was an issue.
Yeah.
Like when we were both trying to list and sell, I was 21 and I think you were 13 or something like that at the time.
19, mate.
But like that was a legitimate issue. So we had to actually go and get some tools and deliver actually learn how to work around that and work through that.
We were from a regional market, and in that regional market, like 90% of the competitors included marketing in the fee. So when we were the first to like want to all of a sudden sell marketing, even some of the salespeople in our own office were kind of like resistant to that actually being a thing. Oh, you're going to lose business. You're not going to make it. And I was like, no. So I'm going to try this whole thing about the large, medium, and small, and the small one's going to be included, like so I can match and then raise. But then I'm going to try to upsell people into the medium, and then I'm going to try to upsell them into a large. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to try and see whether or not we can get a credit card facility at the office. And like, Lucian and I pushed to get credit card in so that people could actually pay via credit card. And at the time, it must have been like just groundbreaking for some of the other salespeople in the office to watch like this little kid come along and go, oh, we're going to do credit card and we're going to sell people on a $1,000, $2,000 or $3,000 marketing package, which at the time was, significant given the average sale price. But what you now learn is that like literally you just made a decision that you wanted to get really clear about what your model is. And the reason that people were going to come and list with you was because you were the first one that was actually doing really good quality photography, or really starting to change copy, or actually getting beautiful signboards and great brochures and all of the other external components that literally a lot of people just take for granted. Oh, that's just what we actually do.
So when you were crafting your presentation, Josh, so you go to a presentation or you've just made a decision, I want to go in this direction regarding VPA or whatever it might be. How would you actually go away and take a concept of identification of that's an area I need to improve, or a new concept I want to implement? How would you go and build that and then get it into your presentation? What was your process for that?
So I have a look at it now. I just had a guy the other day come and show me how he's going to sell marketing, and he did an 11-minute presentation for his whole listing presentation. And the way that he sold marketing was he slid his schedule across the table and goes, there's the marketing. I'm like, okay, how much is that? He goes, oh, 11 grand. I'm like, okay. And what's in that? He goes, it's written there. And I was just like completely, massively underwhelmed compared to what we have learned. And when I was like, you know what, you actually don't understand the theory, because there's so many different things that we can do. So we can use anchoring. Hey, Phil, just so you know, the most expensive campaign we've ever done is $68,000. Now, I'm not going to ask you to spend that tonight, but I will show you and Jen what it is that we do from a marketing point of view. Now, there's an old school rule of thumb that about 0.5 to 1% of the property's value is what you should spend in marketing. So if the home was circa $2 million, that would be somewhere between $10,000 to $20,000. So, and now I want to go and show you some of the campaigns, the large, the medium, the small, and you get the idea. But all of a sudden, because you've heard 68,000 first, and then you've heard 10 to 20, Then when I saw all of a sudden roll out a campaign at 10, 11 or 12 grand, it's not going to be an issue because of the way the information's actually presented. So I think that like reading books like Robert Cialdini's Influence was probably one of the best books of all time to go and read about the sales skills of how you present information could allow you to be wildly successful. And so when you get people go, oh, that doesn't work in my market, is it that doesn't work in your market, or that you haven't yet learnt how to unwire the situation and rewire the situation so that it can work inside of your marketplace? And that was the interesting conversation with this particular portal. You know, they're in a position now that 25% of all listings in their area are vendor paid. Now, from a year ago, it was 0. That's the beginning of a big mountain of change because they're getting really clear about process. So whenever I go to think about the weakness, why is this a weakness? How do I bring the objection up first? How do I position it using very clever tools like anchoring to make sure that's a really easy decision for people to go to make? And if you go and do that and you get like seriously confident, like with you and I, would you need an iPad to go into a listing presentation?
No, definitely not.
So like literally a pen and a piece of paper is probably going to do it. And why? Because we are so tuned now, 20 years down the track, to go, okay, great, we're walking into a job relocation. All these people having a baby. How do I find out their immediate concerns and then allay those concerns? How do I be in a position that I take the pressure off them, that I literally allow them to be able to go and perform at a really high level here because they've got confidence about what they're doing? And if you go to think about that, you are going to get it wrong. And when you do lose in a listing presentation, that's actually okay. But what can you do to then make sure that you don't make the same mistake over and over and over again? I think that's kind of an interesting thing, is that literally the best thing that I ever learned was it was really the person that you're becoming that makes a massive difference inside of this business. Principle, fake it until you make it. Phil, I reckon that this principle's got a bad rap because what the whole idea here in terms of fake it till you make it, it had nothing to do with Instagram. Fake it till you make it was about the belief that literally you start the behaviors first as though that's already happening, and then you continue on those behaviors and eventually it will happen. So in other words, like $1 million writer probably does, 10 calls at the start of every day. So you're just going to fake it. You're just going to get in there and you're just going to start making the 10 calls as though you were the $1 million writer. And if you keep on doing that behavior over the course of 200 days in your business career, you will probably end up writing the million. And so it was really about getting the behaviors in place first, as opposed to looking shining on the gram. You know, that a lot of agents probably confuse that quote with.
I totally agree. I think the quote is being misunderstood. It's about stepping into a set of behaviours and a set of values before the outcomes are actually aligned, you know? So, good one to clarify.
Feeling good and ready for more? Thanks for joining us
On Dream Big,
Move Fast.